Thank you for joining us for this new DAR Forms update. I am Matt Lafferty, Chief Operating Officer of the Delaware Association of Realtors. In this video, members of the DAR Forms Committee will walk through the forms released on March 4, 2026. The session will cover the Appraisal Gap Addendum, the As-Is Addendum with right of inspection for informational purposes only, the Due Diligence Addendum, the Revised PET Addendum for residential leases, and the Pre-Settlement Inspection Acknowledgement Form. As a reminder, nothing discussed in this video is intended to dictate business practices. While DAR forms are developed to support and benefit our members, their use is not mandatory. To begin, we'll take a closer look at the Appraisal Gap Addendum.
Hi, I'm RT Christopher with the DAR Forms Committee, and today I'm here to talk to you about the Appraisal Gap Addendum. This addendum modifies the appraisal contingency by specifying the amount of additional funds the buyer agrees to bring to settlement if the property appraises for less than the purchase price. It also outlines the process for addressing a low appraisal, including the seller's option to reduce the purchase price or the buyer's ability to proceed or terminate the agreement. In paragraph 1, the addendum acknowledges that the agreement of sale is still contingent upon the buyer or buyer's lender obtaining a written appraisal of the property. It also states that if the property value comes in lower than the purchase price, the buyer agrees to cover that gap by bringing additional funds to settlement. That specific amount that the buyer is willing to cover should be discussed in advance and clearly filled in on the addendum in paragraph 1. Paragraph 2 explains what happens if the appraised value, even when combined with the buyer's additional funds, is still less than the purchase price. In that case, the buyer must provide a copy of the appraisal to the seller within a specific number of days. The addendum defaults to 3 days if no date is filled in. The seller then has a specific number of days, 3 days, to respond and may choose to reduce the purchase price to match the appraised value plus the buyer's agreed upon additional funds. Paragraph 3 outlines the next steps if the seller declines to reduce the purchase price, fails to respond, or both parties cannot reach a written agreement. In this situation, the buyer has 2 days after the seller's response deadline to decide whether or not to proceed with the purchase at the seller's final price. If the buyer chooses not to move forward, the agreement becomes null and void. If the agreement is terminated under these terms, all parties agree to promptly sign the appropriate documentation, and any deposit money will be returned to the buyer in accordance with the agreement of sale. Finally, paragraph 4 confirms that the buyer has sufficient liquid funds available and, if requested, can provide documentation to verify their ability to cover the appraisal gap. Overall, we hope this addendum helps create clarity and structure in competitive environments where appraisal values may be a concern to both buyers and sellers.
Hi everyone, John W. Ford here from the DAR Forms Committee, presenting to you the As-Is Addendum with right of inspections for informational purposes only. These forms are not mandatory, but they are yours to use as a member of DAR. Please consult with your broker or manager regarding your company policy and use for these forms. The parties of the transaction are listed at the top there, seller and buyer, and the property address. It does explain that the seller still has to disclose all known defects and do all seller's disclosure as required by law. The property is being sold in as-is condition, and so the buyer is doing this for their informational purposes only. This hopefully, though, better defines what all of this means so that all parties have a clear understanding. There is a time frame for doing these inspections, and that's in paragraph 2. It defaults to 15 days, just like the agreement of sale. So then you would check all that apply. That means all that applies for the as-is inspection part of this. So you can do all of them, you can do none of them, or you can do any of them in category as is inspections. So that means that you would check no on the agreement of sale if you're going to do this as is. You would then complete the addendum and check all that apply for those that will be as is for informational purposes only. However, if you want to do some of the inspections as dictated in the agreement of sale, then you would check yes in the agreement of sale for that particular inspection and leave that blank for check all that apply. So as an example, if you wanted to do the home inspection as is, you would leave section 21 blank, which would be or check it no, which is the home inspection. If you wanted to do a wood destroying insect inspection thoroughly, like is stated in the agreement of sale, then you would check yes in the agreement of sale, and you would leave it blank here for check all that apply. The seller will make the property accessible, and no damage can be done to the property. Additional language like that already exists in our current agreement of sale under the inspection contingencies, and that is page 1 of 2. Page 2 of 2 for the as-is addendum with right of inspections for informational purposes only is very brief but very important. It's all capital letters in the top paragraph, and it makes it clear that the buyer is buying the property in as-is condition. They are waiving their right to any repairs as a result of the inspections. The inspections are for their informational purposes only, for their future use of the property, and that further the buyer shall not share the inspection report with the seller. This concludes the as-is addendum with right of inspections for informational purposes only, both pages 1 and 2. Again, please consult with your broker or manager for your company policy for use of these forms. Thank you. Hi everyone, John Ford again, the DAR Forms Committee, this time on the Due Diligence Addendum. This is another option instead of a regular inspection or series of inspections. The buyer can choose to do a due diligence addendum, which will allow them to void the agreement of sale if they are not satisfied with the results that they've accumulated during that due diligence period. So you would check no in the inspections in lieu of a due diligence addendum if you're using this one, and then add it in the additional addenda list in the agreement of sale. It lists the parties, buyer and seller, at the top there, and the property address. Then the buyer, at their sole expense, will have a time frame. You can see there's a fill in the blank for them to do their due diligence, and that's to do all inspections and anything else that they feel is necessary for them to move forward with the purchase, whether it's their intended use, zoning, anything else that they're going to do. If they don't put a date in there, if the parties don't put a date in there, it defaults to 15 days from ratification. So this also does reinforce the fact that the seller is still required to disclose all known defects of the property as required by seller's disclosure law. So it doesn't change anything there. Seller still has to disclose, and buyer can investigate. Seller will also make the property available, have utilities on, and all of the standard things that are in our agreement of sale now for seller's obligations for inspections. It also states that nothing will be damaged during the inspection, moved unless it's required by the inspections. And that again is standard language in our agreement of sale already. So then what happens at the end? Well, if the buyer in their sole discretion is not satisfied with the results, then they may notify the seller that they're voiding this agreement, as long as they do that within the deadline outlined in the beginning in paragraph 1. Again, 15 days if no date is put in there, and the date, if a date is put in there, is where time is of the essence, and that's the deadline for the buyer to respond. If the buyer does not respond by that deadline, then they have waived this due diligence addendum and they're moving forward with the purchase of the property. That's the due diligence addendum. Again, please review any of these with your broker or manager and find out your company policy for use of additional addenda. Thank you.
There are two simple changes to the pet addendum. The first paragraph was revised to reflect the clarification provided by HUD in early 2020, stating that support animals are to be treated the same as service animals under fair housing laws. The previous version stated the addendum did not apply if a pet was a duly certified and trained support animal, but per HUD's clarification on the law, support animals are not necessarily trained and certified in the way a trained service animal is. So the revised addendum states, the provisions of this addendum do not apply to any assistance animal requested by a resident with a disability as a reasonable accommodation. Requests for assistance animals, together with approval or denial, will be handled separately. Assistance animals are not pets. Your Forms Committee is working on a separate addendum specifically for assistance animals. We hope to have that to you with the next release of updated forms. The second revision is very simple. On the bottom of the form, it's the creation of fields providing for a specific description for up to 2 pets that are being authorized under the lease agreement, instead of just one blank line on the old version. Please note that this addendum is only to be utilized for pets. If a tenant has an assistance animal of any kind, please make sure to reach out to your broker or legal counsel for other addendum options until DAR is able to finalize and release our assistance animal addendum.
Hello, Realtors. My name is Maggie Haas. I'm a broker owner here in Dover, and I'm a member of the DAR Forms Committee. I'm making a quick video to explain the new form, the Pre-Settlement Inspection Acknowledgement Form. It's a very short and sweet little form. It's going to be a great tool working with your buyers and sellers just before settlement. So the point of this form is to set the expectation for your pre-settlement walkthroughs. We received feedback that a lot of agents were running into issues, buyers agents and buyers at walkthroughs that were sort of doing another home inspection and asking for repairs outside of the scope of the walkthrough. So the first thing this form does is sort of set the expectation that the walkthrough is simply to confirm that the home is in the correct condition that was agreed upon in the agreement of sale, like the repairs that were agreed upon, the inclusions and the exclusions that were agreed upon, and that it is in acceptable condition. It is not meant to be a new home inspection. It is not meant to find additional repairs beyond what was agreed upon. So the main statement in this is in bold on the form. The pre-settlement inspection is only intended to verify any previously agreed upon repairs are complete and that the property is in the condition required by the agreement of sale. And then there's 2 check boxes. The buyer will acknowledge that they have either 1, completed the walkthrough, or 2, have waived their right to a walkthrough, so waive their pre-settlement inspection. That also protects the sellers from the buyer coming back on them after settlement, for whatever reason, if something wasn't acceptable, because the buyer would have waived that inspection. So it's a great tool, and it is signed by the buyer. And again, any other questions with this form, you should certainly consult your broker or an attorney. Thanks so much.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this update. We hope you found the information helpful. If you have any questions about these forms or any others in the library, or would like to submit feedback or recommendations, please visit our website using the link provided. All submissions are reviewed by the DAR Forms Committee, and we continuously welcome input from our members. As always, when in doubt, consult your broker for guidance. Thank you again for joining us. We look forward to connecting with you during our next round of Forms updates.